In the freezing altitudes over occupied Europe, a ritual of near-religious solemnity took place. Aboard the rattling, unpressurized fuselage of a B-17 Flying Fortress, one crewman was set apart. He was the bombardier, and in his care was a device so secret, it was considered more valuable than the 10-man crew, more valuable, even, than the 4-engine bomber that carried it. This object, shrouded obstathelose canvas and locked away until the final moments, was known to the crew only as the Gadget, or the Blue Ox. To the outside world, it was a ghost, a rumor whispered in hushed tones. But to the United States Army Air Forces, it was the key. Not just a key to hitting a target, but the key to validating an entire theory of warfare. Before each mission, the bombardier swore an oath, not just to his country, but to the device itself. He pledged to defend it with his life. If capture was imminent, he was to destroy it. A small thermite charge was built into its housing for this very purpose, designed to melt its intricate guts into a useless, unidentifiable lump of metal. And if that failed, he was issued a .45 caliber pistol. His final, terrible duty was not to fight the enemy, but to shoot the device, shattering its lenses and destroying its mechanisms. This was the Norden Bombsight. And it carried a promise so profound, so audacious, it bordered on a messianic prophecy, the ability to drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet. It was the weapon that promised to make war surgical, to dismantle an enemy's industrial heart with a precision so absolute, it could end the conflict padros months, saving millions of lives. This is the declassified story of that promise, of the incredible machine at its heart, and of the brutal reality that met it applicassal the war-torn skies of the Second World War. The first half of the 20th century was a period of violent technological adolescence. The static, mud-choked slaughter of the First World War had seared a lesson into the minds of military strategists. A war of attrition was no victory at all. Thinkers like Giulio Douhet in Italy, Hugh Trenchard in Britain, and Billy Mitchell in the United States, looked to the sky. They envisioned a new kind of warfare, one militia would bypass the trenches and the armies entirely. An armada of bombers, they argued, could fly padros the enemy's heartland and systematically destroy the factories, the power plants, and the rail yards, the very sinews of a modern nation's ability to wage war. By striking at the source of production and crippling civilian morale, air power could deliver a knockout blow, making vast, land-based invasions obsolete. It was a clean, clinical, and compelling theory. By the late 1930s, it had become article of faith for the U.S. Army Air Corps. It was the driving force behind the development of their magnificent, state-of-the-art heavy bombers, the B-17 Flying Fortress and, later, the B-24 Liberator. These were flying dreadnoughts, bristling with machine guns and capable of carrying tons of explosives over vast distances. They were the physical embodiment of the strategic bombing doctrine. But there was a fatal flaw in this grand vision, a disconnect between the magnificent theory and the crude, unforgiving laws of physics. Dropping a bomb from 4 miles up is an exercise in controlled chaos. An unguided, dumb, bomb is subject to a maelstrom of variables. It does not fall straight down. It continues forward with the momentum of the aircraft, tracing a long, parabolic arc. Its trajectory is warped by air density, which changes with altitude. It is pushed trabalis by wind, a force that can vary wildly in speed and direction at different layers of the atmosphere. The slightest deviation in the aircraft's speed, altitude, or angle of flight at the moment of release can send the bomb hundreds, or even thousands, of feet wide of its mark. Early bombing efforts in the war were, see Shan, a testament to this inaccuracy. The Royal Air Force, after suffering devastating losses in early daylight raids, switched to night bombing. Under the cover of darkness, TAR men could not see individual buildings. They resorted to area bombing, saturation attacks on entire cities, a blunt and brutal instrument of attrition. But the Americans were committed to a different path. Their doctrine was daylight precision bombing. It was a point of pride, a moral and strategic imperative. They would not blanket bomb cities, they would surgically remove the cancer of Nazi industry. To do this, they needed to solve the physics problem. The early bomb sights were rudimentary. The British course-setting bombsight was a simple slide rule-based device requiring manual calculations and a steady hand. It was an improvement over pure guesswork, but it was nowhere near precise enough for the American doctrine. In the clear, calm air of American test ranges, pilots might achieve some accuracy. But in the real world of combat, with enemy fighters tearing through the formation, black puffs of flak rocking the aircraft, and the bombardier's hands shaking from cold and fear. Hitting a target the size of a factory was less a science and more a matter of pure, unadulterated luck. The Air Corps knew this. They knew that without a solution, their multi-billion-dollar investment in heavy bombers and the entire strategic doctrine they were built upon would be rendered a failure. They needed a technological miracle. They needed a machine that could think. The man who would provide that miracle was not a military officer or a government scientist, but a reclusive, notoriously difficult Dutch-American engineer named Carl L. Norden. Norden was a genius, a perfectionist obsessed with mechanical precision. Born in Java and educated in Switzerland, he had emigrated to the United States and worked with Elmer Sperry on gyroscopic stabilization systems for the U.S. Navy. He was a man consumed by his work, often sleeping on a cot in his New York City workshop. He was also cantankerous, stubborn, and had little patience for Narcy who could not match his intellectual rigor. Norden's work was initially for the Navy, ZAD with creating a device to help naval aircraft bomb moving ships. This was a far more complex problem than hitting a stationary land target. But Norden, working with his lead engineer, Frederick I Entwistle, approached it not as a problem of war, but as a problem of mechanics and mathematics. His goal was to create a machine that could automatically and flawlessly account for all the variables that plagued a bombardier. The result of his labor, developed through the 1920s and 30s, was the Norden Mark 15 bombsight. It was not a single device, but a system of two interconnected parts. The first was the stabilizer, which was a direct, albeit vastly improved, descendant of his earlier work with Sperry. It contained a complex array of electrically driven gyroscopes that spun at thousands of RPM. These gyros created an incredibly stable platform, effectively isolating the bombsight's telescope from the vibration, pitch, and roll of the aircraft. When the bombardier looked through the eyepiece, the world below did not shake or tilt with the plane's movements. It remained placid and steady, as if he was suspended on a fixed platform in the sky. This alone was a major breakthrough. But the true genius of the Norden was nascosto in its second component. The director, a rectangular box sat atop the stabilizer. This was a mechanical analog computer of staggering complexity. It was a pre-digital marvel, a symphony of gears, discs, rollers, and motors, all machined to tolerances of less than 1/10,000th of an inch. This was the brain of the system. Operating the Norden was an intense and intricate process. Long before reaching the initial point, or IP, where the bomb run would begin, the bombardier would begin his work. Using a series of knobs and dials, he would manually input the critical data. He would dial in the aircraft's true airspeed, which he received from the pilot. He would dial in the precise altitude, tafia he got from the navigator. He had to account for the trail of the specific type of bomb being carried, the distance the bomb would lag behind the aircraft due to air resistance after it was dropped. This data was pre-calculated for each bomb type. The most difficult variable was the wind. The bombardier had to determine the speed and direction of the wind, a process called synchronization. As the bomber flew toward the target, the bombardier would find a reference point on the ground and lock the sight's crosshairs onto it. As the plane moved, the crosshairs would naturally drift off the point due to the wind. Using two large control knobs, one for range, one for azimuth, the bombardier would manually turn the sight to keep the crosshairs perfectly centered on the reference point. As he did this, the movement of his knobs was feeding information into the computer. The gears and discs inside our mechanismo were calculating the drift angle, the difference between where the plane was pointing and where it was actually going. By keeping the crosshairs locked on a point for a period of time, the computer could deduce the exact speed and direction of the wind's effect on the aircraft. This process would establish the rate, the precise angular velocity needed to keep the sight tracking a stationary point on the ground. Once this rate was established, the bombardier was ready. He would turn his attention to the actual target. He would locate the factory, the railiad, or the submarine pen in his telescope, and using his control knobs, he would adjust the sight until the vertical crosshair passed directly through the target. He would then make his final, critical adjustments, moving the entire sight forward or backward along a track until the horizontal crosshair was also perfectly aligned. And here, in the final, tense moments of the bomb run, the Norden revealed its most secret and revolutionary feature. The Norden was not just a sight, it was a pilot. It was directly coupled to the aircraft's C-1 autopilot. In the last 30 to 60 seconds before bomb release, the bombardier would call out over the intercom, "I have the ship." The pilot and co-pilot would take their hands and feet off the controls. The Norden Bombsight was now flying the B-17. Any final, minute corrections the bombardier made with his knobs did not just move the crosshairs, they sent electrical signals to the autopilot servos, which adjusted the aircraft's rudder and flight surfaces. The bombardier was making corrections with a precision no human pilot, under the stress of combat, could ever hope to match. He was guiding the 30-ton bomber as if it were an extension of his own eye. With the crosshairs locked on the target, the computer inside the Norden was performing its final, silent calculation. It knew the plane's speed, its altitude, the effect of the wind, and the ballistics of the bomb. It was continuously calculating the exact release angle. When the aircraft reached the precise point in space where the bomb's long, arcing trajectory would intersect with the target on the ground, the Norden did not wait for the bombardier to press a button. It released the bombs automatically. An electrical contact would close, a light would flash, and the bomb bay doors would snap open as the payload tumbled out into the cold air. This was the source of the pickle barrel myth. In the perfect, clear air conditions and over Azione the Mojave Desert, the Norden performed astonishingly well. The Army Air Forces, desperate for a morale boost and a way to justify a massive bomber program, seized on these test results. The Norden was classified top secret. Its existence was whispered about in the press, creating a legend. It was the American wonder weapon, the technological silver bullet that would allow the USAAF to conduct warfare with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. The security surrounding the device was unprecedented. Each one, costing over $25,000 in 1940s money, the price of a small house, was manufactured under armed guard at a handful of factories. When not in use, they were stored in climate-controlled, bomb-proof vaults known as bombsight shacks. Before a mission, they would be signed out by the bombardier and escorted to the aircraft under the watchful eyes of military police. A canvas cover was placed over it, only to be removed once the bomber was safely airborne. The bombardier's oath, the thermite charge, the pistol, it all added to the mystique. The men were indoctrinated with the belief that allowing a Norden to fall into enemy hands would be a catastrophe of the highest order. It was, they were told, the single most important military secret of the United States. When a B-17 named Meathound crash-landed in the Netherlands in 1943, its bombardier, Lieutenant David G. Pappy Lewis, was badly injured. Despite his wounds, his first instinct was to fulfill his oath. He took his .45 and fired round after round into the bombsight, smashing its delicate machinery before the Germans could arrive. This level of devotion was not uncommon. The bombardiers believed, with every fiber of their being, that they were the custodians of victory. They were the men who, thanks to Carl Norden's genius, would place bombs directly onto Hitler's war machine and bring the war to a swift, decisive end. The promise was in place. The machine was ready. Now, it would face the ultimate test. In 1942, the vanguard of the US 8th Air Force began arriving in England. They brought with them their gleaming B-17s, their unwavering belief in daylight precision bombing, and their top-secret Norden bomb sights. They were an island of American confidence in a sea of British skepticism. The RAF, bloodied and bruised by their own attempts at daylight bombing, had resigned themselves to the brutal, inaccurate business of night raids. They warned the Americans that the German defenses and the European weather would chew them to pieces. The Americans, armed with their self-defending flying fortresses and the pickle barrel bombsight, were undeterred. The initial raids were against relatively light defended targets in France and the Low Countries. The results were encouraging, or at least, they were portrayed as such. But as the 8th Air Force began to push deeper into the heart of the Third Reich, the grand promise of the Norden began to collide with a series of brutal and unforgiving realities. The first, and most intractable, enemy was not the Luftwaffe or German flak, but the weather. The skies over industrial Germany were a far cry from the crystal-clear deserts of Arizona. They were choked with a near-permanent blanket of cloud, fog, haze, and industrial smog. The Norden, for all its mechanical brilliance, was an optical device. If the bombardier could not see the target, the bombsight was nothing more than 50 pounds of useless, complicated metal. Mission after mission was scrubbed, or forced to divert to secondary targets, because of cloud cover. Veterans' testimony is filled with the frustration of flying for 8 hours through hell, only to arrive over the target and find it completely obscured. In these common instances, the entire formation would have to resort to bombing on the leader, or worse, simply guessing. The pickle barrel was a fantasy if you couldn't even see the barrel. The second reality was the sheer, unmitigated terror of a bomb run. The Norden required a steady, methodical hand and a cool, calculating mind. It demanded that the bombardier fly the aircraft with minute precision for up to a minute, a lifetime in combat. But this was happening in an environment of absolute chaos. Flak shells were exploding all around, peppering the thin aluminum skin of the bomber with shrapnel, rocking the plane violently, and throwing off the delicate gyroscopic stabilization. Enemy fighters, the Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s, were pressing their attacks, their cannons tearing through fuselages and engines. Men were screaming, wounded or dying, over the intercom. The aircraft was filled with the smell of cordite, hydraulic fluid, and fear. To expect a young man, often in his early 20s, to calmly manipulate a complex series of knobs and dials under these conditions was, perhaps, the greatest ask of the war. A slight tremor, a moment of distraction, a jolt from a nearby explosion, any of it could ruin the delicate calculation, sending thousands of pounds of high explosives wide of the mark. The third problem was inherent in the doctrine itself. To maximize defensive firepower, the bombers flew in tight, combat box formations. While this helped fend off fighters, it created a new bombing problem. It was impossible for every bombardier in a formation of 36 or more aircraft to conduct their own independent, synchronized bomb run. The practice, therefore, was for only the lead and deputy lead bombardiers to actually use their Nordens. The rest of the formation would simply watch the lead plane and toggle their bombs away the instant they saw the leader's payload drop. This meant that the accuracy of an entire combat group, hundreds of men and dozens of aircraft, rested on the skill and luck of one or two bombardiers. If the lead bombardier had a bad run, if his sight was damaged, if he was flustered, if a cloud momentarily obscured his view, then the entire formation's bomb load would be wasted. And if the lead bomber was hit and shot down during the bomb run, a common German tactic, the result was chaos, with the remaining planes dropping their bombs based on little more than a prayer. The combination of these factors, weather, combat stress, and formation tactics, had a devastating effect on accuracy. The promise of pickle barrel precision dissolved in the skies over Germany. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, a comprehensive post-war analysis, delivered the sobering, declassified verdict. Across the entire 8th Air Force, for the entire war, only about 20% of the bombs aimed at specific targets fell within 1,000 feet of the aim point. The median circular error probable, a measure of accuracy, was often in excess of a mile. For every bomb that hit a factory, dozens more fell on the surrounding fields, civilian neighborhoods, and city blocks. The dream of surgical warfare had failed. But the greatest, most astounding irony of the Norden Bombsight story was yet to be revealed. While bombardiers were being ordered to sacrifice their lives to protect the Norden's secrets, while the Army Air Forces spent millions on security, the secret was already out. In fact, it had never been a secret at all. The man who betrayed the Norden was a German-born, naturalized American citizen named Hermann Lang. Lang was a draftsman and an assembler at the Carl L. Norden Corporation. He was also a spy for the German Abwehr. From 1938, long before the United States entered the war, Lang began methodically memorizing the blueprints for the Norden's intricate components. During visits to Germany, he would recreate the drawings from memory, handing them over to his handlers. By 1941, before a single American bomber had flown a combat mission in Europe, the German military was in possession of a complete set of plans for the Norden Mark 15. The Germans, using Lang's stolen plans, even constructed their own version, the Luftfernrohr 7, or Luftwaffe 7. It was an excellent piece of engineering, in some ways simpler and easier to use than the Norden. The staggering truth is that the most heavily guarded secret of the American war effort was being studied and replicated by the enemy before the war had even truly begun for America. The oaths, the armed guards, the thermite charges, the pistols, it was all security theater, protecting a secret that had been blown years before. The Germans understood the Norden's capabilities and its limitations, because they had the schematics sitting on a desk in Berlin. So, was a Norden a colossal failure? A $2 billion boondoggle that failed to deliver on its single, core promise? The answer, like so much in war, is more complex. It was, without question, a failure in living up to its own propaganda. It did not make bombing surgical, and it did not, by itself, end the war. But to dismiss it entirely is to miss its more nuanced, and perhaps more important, contributions. Firstly, the Norden was a powerful psychological weapon. For the crews flying into a maelstrom of death and destruction, the belief in the Norden's capabilities was a crucial morale booster. They had been told it was a war-winning weapon, a symbol of American technological superiority. This belief, however misplaced, gave them a sense of purpose and confidence. It was a tangible reason to believe their mission was not a suicide run, but a calculated, effective blow against the enemy. In the dark days of 1943, when casualty rates were astronomically high, that belief was a form of psychological armor. Secondly, while it was not the magic bullet it was claimed to be, the Norden was a significant improvement over anything that had come before. It was far superior to the crude sights used by other air forces at the start of the war. It did improve bombing accuracy, just not to the mythical levels that had been promised. It provided a stable, usable platform that, in the hands of a skilled bombardier and in clear weather, could and did produce results. The Norden's perceived failure also forced a crucial evolution in American bombing strategy. When it became clear that pinpoint strikes were largely impossible, the USAAF, while still officially committed to precision, began to broaden its definition of the term. Targets shifted from individual factory buildings to larger complexes, marshalling yards, and entire industrial districts. The Norden was still used to aim, but a miss of a few hundred feet no longer mattered if the target itself was a square mile. This shift, to what was effectively a form of area bombing, was brutal, but it was also, in the cold calculus of war, more effective at disrupting German production. And there was one theater of war where the Norden came closer to fulfilling its promise: the Pacific. Against the Japanese, bombardiers often found clearer skies. But more importantly, the Norden's original design purpose, hitting moving ships, proved invaluable. In naval battles like the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, Army Air Force bombers using Norden sights were instrumental in sinking Japanese transports and warships. Here, the sight's ability to calculate and correct for a moving target was not a myth, but a combat-proven reality. Finally, the Norden has a last, chilling chapter in its operational history. On August 6, 1945, Bombardier Thomas Ferriby, aboard the B-29, Enola Gay, used a Norden bombsight to aim and drop the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, Captain Kermit Behan used another Norden to target Nagasaki. The two most consequential and devastating bombing missions in human history, the missions that did, in fact, precipitate the end of the war, were guided to their targets by Carl Norden's mechanical computer. The pickle barrel was a myth, but a city was a target that could not be missed. The Norden, the device that promised a new, cleaner form of war, ended its service by ushering in the atomic age. The Norden bombsight is a relic now, a museum piece. Its intricate gyros are still, its gears are motionless. But its legacy is embedded in every smart bomb, every cruise missile, and every GPS-guided munition that followed. It was one of the world's first deployed analog computers, a flawed, transitional technology that was a bridge between the unguided, dumb bombs of the past and the digital precision of modern warfare. The story of the Norden is a powerful cautionary tale. It's a story of the gap between the promises of technology and the messy, unpredictable reality of war. It's a story of propaganda, secrecy, and the weight of a nation's hopes being placed on the shoulders of one machine and the young men who operated it. It did not deliver the clean, surgical victory it promised, but in its complex and paradoxical history, as a morale booster, a flawed tool, an intelligence failure, and finally, the instrument for atomic Armageddon, it undeniably changed the course of the Second World War and the future of conflict itself. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe for more stories.